looking at how to make a Tufte-approved figure. So I'm in the Lab 1 workbook. I'm looking at the example seer data for the invasive prostate cancer. I'm going to select all the data from 1975 to 2013. I'm going to copy and paste into seer data over here. Great, now we're ready to make a chart. Since this information is charting information over time, we're going to insert a line graph. So if you go to this scatter situation, go to the scatter with smooth lines. Great, now we have a lovely Excel chart. I'm just going to make this a little bigger. So a couple things. The first step, I want to fix the axes. So I'm going to double click on the x-axis to change the bounds. The reason why we want to change the bounds is that there's a lot of excess white space here. So to get rid of that, we're going to go to the minimum and make sure that the axis actually starts with where our data starts, so 1975. Then we click enter and you see that that white space has gone away. Now we can X out of this. The next thing I want to do is make sure to label both of my axes. I'm going to first start with my y-axis. So I'm going to go over to the left-hand side of the screen, add a chart element, go to axis title, and go to primary vertical. Then this text box shows up. I'm going to delete it and put rate per 100,000 males. It's important to include units. So in this case, it's a rate per 100,000 males. It might be rate per 100,000 population. It might not be a rate. The units can really clue the reader into what information they're seeing. However, this label is pretty hard to read. So in order to change this orientation, I'm going to double click on this box. Wait for a second, and then this format axis title should pop up. I'm going to go to the square on the right hand side, sizes and properties, and look at text direction and rotate text to be horizontal. Now this looks pretty good. I'm now going to look at the x-axis and add a chart element here to label this axis appropriately as the year. And this one, luckily, is already formatted to be in horizontal. Great. Now, I'm going to check out these data series. So, a couple things. First, they're blue and red, which are not grayscale, and there's also this pretty unhelpful legend over here. So, to change the data color, I'm going to double-click. And now I get, again, this format bar. I'm going to click on the fill color paint can. I'm going to look at color. I'm going to select black. I'm going to X out of here. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this data series on the bottom. Again, click the paint can. But in this case, choose the color as a dark gray. Now, I'm going to get rid of this legend by clicking on it and deleting. We're going to add labels in when we get to a PowerPoint. So for right now, leave these unlabeled. I'm next going to look at the grid lines. In the case of the vertical grid lines, these really don't add a lot to the table. So I'm actually going to get rid of them by clicking on them and then deleting. The horizontal grid lines, some people might like to keep this. It's a pretty light color, so I don't think it's necessarily redundant ink. I think that the information presented by these vertical grid lines, so these different benchmark rates, isn't that helpful because the incidence rate is so much greater than the death rate. You know, it's not necessarily useful information. If these two lines were to be close together, this might be helpful to have a grid line. But that isn't the case, so I'm actually going to get rid of them. So again, I'm going to delete these grid lines. And now, before I think we're ready to put this into PowerPoint, so I'm going to copy this chart and put it into PowerPoint through copying and pasting into my new PowerPoint presentation slide. It's going to take a couple minutes, seconds. Okay, so now we have our chart. A couple of things when you make the transformation from Excel to PowerPoint. Usually the font size is much decreased, so I'm going to first go through and make sure that these font sizes are legible. I'm going to increase it to be 18. I'm going to change the font to be Arial. That's usually a little bit more legible. I'm also going to change the size of my axis. The way I did that was by clicking on the axis, changing the font size, and then changing the font type. I'm going to go through this with my x-axis as well. Now if you say, Helen, this graph now looks really scrunched because I changed the font size, that's okay. We can change the relative proportion of the graph. And the way we do that is we can format our chart area. We can increase it to be the size of our PowerPoint slide. And then we can decrease the size of the chart area by expanding or decreasing this inner box right here. Great. So now we're ready to put a title on and to label our data series. I'm going to title this Age Adjusted Rates of Invasive Prostate Cancer for U.S. men 1975 through 2013. So a couple things about this title. First, we want to make sure that the population of interest is included. So in this case, it's U.S. men of all ages. Secondly, we want to have the event be part of our title. So the event that we're measuring here is age-adjusted rates of invasive prostate cancer. Third thing that's really important is including the years of the data, so 1975 to 2013. This is critical so that a reader can quickly assess how recent your data is. Again, I'm going to change this to mimic in the font and size of my axes and change this to be centered. I'm going to bold. And now I'm ready to apply some data labels. So I'm going to click out of here and I'm going to go to insert a text box. I'm going to insert the text box at the right hand side of the curve so that it's legible, and I'm going to label this as incidence rate. Again, I'm going to make sure that the font matches my font for the rest of the figure. I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste to get another text box. Make sure that it's positioned at an equivalent place. Great. Now I'm ready to center, so I'm going to center this graph really quickly. I'm going to recenter or readjust these text boxes. I'm going to increase the spacing on my title because usually you want a little bit of space, and these are more subjective things, but this makes it a little bit more legible for the reader. I might bold the titles or the labels of the axes to also make this clearer. And now I'm ready to put a note in. So this note should include both a source and a summary statement. So for my source, I'm going to put my SEER data. I'm going to insert my hyperlink. I'm going to explain my asterisks here. So if you remember, the age-adjusted per SEER data was age-adjusted rates were standardized to the 2000 U.S. population. And then I'm going to include a brief note that describes what's going on in the figure. So incidence rates increased dramatically through the early 1990s, while death rate remained constant. Now I'm going to make sure that this source similarly has the same size, that it fits into my PowerPoint. So again, you might have to adjust the placement of everything. And usually these notes are at a slightly smaller font size, though still legible. And now we're ready to PDF. And so again, to go to PowerPoint, you go to File, Save As. You go to Save It, and instead of saving it as a PowerPoint presentation, you're going to save it as a PDF. And then you click to Export, and voila, you have your Tufte-approved figure. Thanks, and let us know if you have any additional questions.